conducted by a research partner, one of the world's leading analyst firms, Frost & Sullivan. It was conducted by this team, right there, specialized in cybersecurity and digital transformation. With previous studies with government agencies and major cybersecurity organizations, we knew that this team will provide a study worth knowing and worth sharing to organizations in the country. So without further ado, let's see the findings of the study. It is my pleasure to welcome on stage Ms. Mary Jo Schrade.
All right, thanks everybody. So just to give you a little background, my name is Mary Jo Schrade. I am as I was introduced, I'm the lead for Microsoft's Digital Crimes Unit. So that basically is a group of over 80 attorneys, investigators, analysts, and people involved in forensic and big data analysis. And all of us work together to try to help protect Microsoft's customers. So one of the things that we look at, for example, is botnet takedown. So we work across a number of groups and even outside of our group, but with the security people at Microsoft, trying to help make things safer for customers. So I'll tell you a bit about that as we're going through the results of this study. So just to sort of lay the groundwork in terms of the world today, every company, no matter its size, is involved in digital transformation. I mean, if you just think about where you all work and that you're checking your email on your phones, you're communicating with each other on WhatsApp, your various different things are going on that are outside the control of your IT department unless they broaden their concept and what they're responsible for. So regardless of how we think about ourselves, we're all going through this digital transformation, and businesses are really struggling trying to figure out how to keep up with all the various endpoints, all the various components of this transformation. So the way that Microsoft talks about where we are today is the concept of the intelligent cloud. So the intelligent cloud is made up of all the components, all the things that we use that enable us to do our job better. The sort of sophisticated tools in many cases, but sometimes very simple things like the mapping tool that you might use to find the new Grand Hyatt, or the tool that you might use that would help keep up with when you need to reorder some product for your business. So all of these things combined together make up what we call the intelligent edge. It's not just the high-end fancy automation, but that's certainly a part of it. But it's also just everything that we use. The games that we and our kids play, all of these things are connected together, and each one of them is a source of data, a source of information, but also a source of security concerns. I mean, when we think about how we deal with and what IT people have to deal with today, how do they keep up with all these things? If there are risks associated with those, what are they going to do? And when you think about what consumers are looking for when they go out to buy something these days, it's not necessarily security at the front of their mind, but they're bringing those devices into the workplace, and it's impacting and influencing what happens in the workplace. So when you think about the workplace itself and how it's made up and what the IT group and the security group and the board of directors is concerned about, we think of it as the digital estate. If you think about all the different components, when you hear about a data breach, for example, that took place in the United States involving a large supermarket chain, their issue was a contractor that had access to their system because the contractor needed to submit bills, needed to submit proposals, and that kind of thing. But a vulnerability in that system allowed someone to come in and take thousands of people's data and information. That kind of thing is something that when you're the person in charge of keeping track of what's going on with your IT department, you're not thinking about your contractor's IT department. And by the same token, the contractor is not thinking about target and the fact that when they go into the system, that they might be able to go around to any place in the system. They may not be as restricted as they should be. So all of these different things are things that are the things that keep people awake at night. And during the course of the survey, Frost and Sullivan got a lot of information about the kind of things that are keeping IT people and directors and decision makers awake at night, and how the Philippines in many ways is very similar to all the other markets that were surveyed in terms of its concerns and the perception as to its vulnerabilities. But I'll talk a bit about some ways in which the Philippines is different. So as we talk about the concerns that somebody in IT would have, and somebody who's the chief operating officer, for example, of a company, even a mid-sized company, when you think about all of the tools that are out there. So when you go to something like a trade show, there could be 500 vendors at the trade show, each of which has some tool, some idea, some thought as to what you could use to protect your information, to protect your data, to protect your employees' information. And all of these kinds of things are things that you need to think about. Do you need them all? If you buy 100 of them, if you buy all 500, is that going to be your answer to your problem? And so we'll show you how that the more you have is not necessarily making you more secure. It actually could cause you more problems down the line. So with that, I'm going to sort of pivot over to one of the things that Microsoft does is it puts out this security intelligence report. This comes out twice a year, and this is something that's pretty interesting. One just came out a couple months ago, and it was really focused on the information that Microsoft has because of the various endpoints that Microsoft sees. So if you think about the diversity of the business that Microsoft has, one of the things we have is Xbox. And so we have to validate when people come on to Xbox, when people are using it, to make sure that they're not using somebody else's credentials or stealing things from people. But at the same time, we're also scanning to see if somebody's email might have a phishing scam in it, because if we're aware of a phishing scam, we can actually go and take that and disable it from somebody's email so it won't impact them. And so all these various components of looking for threats to try to protect customers come together and create the security intelligence report. And so some of the findings that we'll talk about here today are findings that relate to the gathering of this data and then what Microsoft sees as its obligation to protect customers in connection with having all this data. So the first thing, the number one thing that this security intelligence report draws out is botnets affecting millions of people. So just for any of you who aren't familiar with botnets, it's a collection of computers that have been taken over by some criminal enterprise, and then those computers are used by the criminal enterprise, often without the knowledge of the person who is owning the computer. They may have no idea at all that their computer is infected and it's being used. And so the computers can be used for things like, well, the kind of thing we hear about a lot, which is we can get your information, your private information. We may want to steal your financial information. That's one thing that happens when a botnet can take over your computer. And that's an example of something that the botnet that Microsoft took down in November called Gamaroo. It was one of the things it did was it would steal information from you. But another thing it did is it would open itself up to loading of more bad software on your computer. So it was the kind of thing that facilitated, once you got that infection, it was as though you're vulnerable to every infection. Anybody who wants to infect you can just pay money to the person who owns that botnet, and they will put that infection on your computer to do whatever it is they want to do. It might be a back door that lets them go in and take your data out. It can be all kinds of things. So that's affecting millions of people. And some of the things that we see in connection with these botnets is that when Microsoft takes down the botnet, we get a court order that allows us to take over control of the command and control servers. And so we now see all these infected computers because they're coming to Microsoft saying, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? Should we send out some spam? What do you want us to do? So in this case, we can see that, and we can see that hundreds of thousands of computers, sometimes millions of computers, can be infected by a single group of botnets. So this is the number one finding of the Security Intelligence Report and the number one concern that Microsoft's been working on. And then in terms of easy marks, I think this might be obvious, but if you don't patch your computer, if you don't take any security update and put it on your computer when it comes through, you're a vulnerability out there, and they can see that. They can see when computers aren't patched. And the reason that companies put out patches is to protect people from vulnerabilities in a lot of cases. And so what we see is that they're able to see computers that aren't patched, and it will install on those computers. At the same time, we see that phishing, which is sending an email where you're trying to get somebody, you're tricking them into clicking a link or opening an attachment. Phishing is another place where they're looking for vulnerabilities. And there's kind of a joke that each one of us knows at least one person who would click on anything. I think that's probably true. We probably all know at least one person who will open an email and say, oh, a Nairobian prince wants to marry me. So that's the vulnerability that these IT directors, that these COOs and CEOs are having to worry about, and that was certainly something we saw in putting together our Security Intelligence Report. And then the last thing on ransomware, you've heard about this where someone takes over your information, they lock it down, they don't give you access to it, and they tell you that you have to pay them in order to get access. And one of the things we see is that even when you pay them, they don't give you access. So if you do pay them, are you setting yourself up to be more vulnerable in the future? If you don't pay them, are you never going to get access to your information? So things like Amaru, it was intended to distribute ransomware in addition to all the other things it did. So that's another thing that we're seeing in connection with our Security Intelligence Report. So with all that as the basis of, why it's a wonder that people who are in charge of companies sleep at all, we will move to the economic impact. So now we're going into the survey results. So now we're going into what people in the Philippines have said in terms of their concerns, their worries, what they think about. So in the context of the Security Intelligence Report, you think about, well, knowing all this is public information, what are they worried about? What should they be concerned about? So the first type of question that we asked were a series of a few questions. And the intent of these questions was to say, have you ever experienced a security incident? And if you don't think you have, did you check? Do you know? Have you been watching? So the interesting thing about these results is not in the 52% who may have or the 48% who didn't. The interesting thing here is the 34% who are not sure because they haven't checked. And so you think about that in terms of the overall vulnerabilities. If you're not monitoring, if you're not watching, if you don't know, the risk is, the likelihood is that there's somebody in there. There's somebody in your system. Somebody's been there, they may still be there. So that's really a concern. And then 48% who have been doing regular forensics and data breach analysis and who haven't had any kind of an incident. That's good that they're keeping up with that information. But really, it's the 18% and the 34% that are the concern. So when we talk about the loss, Frost and Sullivan, the people who did the survey, they analyzed 3 kinds of loss. So there's the kind of easy one to describe, the direct loss. And that is the revenue that you lose when you've had a cybersecurity incident, the productivity, any fines associated with it, and you've probably heard about, or at least received about 500 emails about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations that went into force in the past week in Europe. That's really a big deal for a company that gets involved with customers in Europe. There's also lawsuits, remediation, having to pay back the costs of things that get lost. And then there's also the indirect cost. So that's a little bit harder to say exactly what it is, but asking people who received a survey, what do you think is the value of the customers you may have lost, your reputational damage? And then there's the third layer, which is the hardest one, and most of these surveys don't try to even estimate at this layer, but just the general loss as a whole across all of these companies, not specific to one particular company's loss. So job loss, enterprise spending, consumer spending. So we'll go through a little bit more of this, but this is a Philippine-specific estimate by Frost and Sullivan, and it's really pretty compelling to say that $3.5 billion would be the total monetary loss for all organizations in the Philippines, not in the world, but in the Philippines, that experienced a security incident. So that amount equals 1.1% of the total GDP. So the total gross domestic product of the Philippines, 1.1% of that is estimated to be the economic impact of cyber attacks across the Philippines. So going back to the breakdown of how they figured out this amount, and like I said, there's the 3 kinds of damages that we talked about. So in this case, they're looking at large organizations had an average of $7.5 million that they reported as what it cost them in terms of economic loss from a security incident. And then a mid-sized organization, which goes up to about 500, so maybe 250 to 500 in that range of employees. So that's considered mid-sized, and then anything below that would be small. So a mid-sized organization said their average was $35,000. And then across all organizations, it would average out to $20,000. And so this is basically what they reported in the survey as what they believe their costs and loss were as a result of cyber security incident. And then we asked also about jobs. Did this impact jobs? And so one of the things that's interesting that it's logical to think, well, maybe somebody in IT would have a job impacted by this, but it was reported to go beyond IT. It's not just IT, that when you lose business, when you have reputational harm, you may have to let go of people beyond people in the IT department because you have lost business as a result. So while 28% said that there were no jobs lost, there were, and the majority said less than 1% of their manpower was lost as a result of a cybersecurity breach. There still were a number who reported, and if you add up the remaining 33%, who had significant job loss as a result of the cybersecurity incident. So when we talked to them then about, Frost and Sullivan talked to them about the cyber threats and their perceptions and what they were most worried about. Businesses in the Philippines reported being most worried about two things: data corruption and data exfiltration. So all of these other things were things they were worried about, but the things that they thought would have the most impact on them and cause them the longest time to recover. And it kind of makes sense, especially the data corruption. If you have a situation where your data has been corrupted and you can't access it, or someone has taken it and you can't get it back, that would be something that would be concerning. But some of the other things that result from cyber threats can also be quite concerning, that malware and loss of intellectual property and that kind of things. But the main things that Philippine businesses reported were these two. And so we said, well, what do you do about it? Going back to the point where you go to the trade show and there's 500 solutions, do you hire drones to fly over your business and monitor things for you? What do you do? So the Frost and Sullivan people asked, how many security solutions do you have? And how many security incidents have you had? So one of the things that's interesting is that for companies that had over 50 security solutions, so they had bought 50 different things, that they had a higher percentage of security incidents. So a conclusion that you could draw from that would be that it's complex to manage so many things and that more isn't necessarily better. There could be other factors impacting that, because there is a dip at between 26 and 50 solutions, but it's just interesting that the logic that if you more security makes you safer doesn't really pan out all the time. So here's a more graphic detail in terms of how long it takes to recover from a security incident when you have so many different solutions. And this one seems a little more self-explanatory or logical, that if you have a lot of things you have to go back and reset and change, that it would take a while. So if you look at the greenish color, the gray-green, that's the shortest, that's within an hour. So if you have fewer than 10 solutions, that they were 38% said they were able to respond within an hour. But when you get up to over 50 solutions, that's down to 17%. That's half as many were able to respond quickly. And among those who had more than 50 solutions, it took them more than a day. 67% of them, it took more than a day. So it's interesting, it could be that their business is more complex. It could be that they might be more, the attacks are more focused on things like stealing financial information from banks or something. So there could be other things that are factoring in here, but still it doesn't seem to pay off to have lots of solutions without some strategic plan in connection with that. So when we think about strategic planning then for cybersecurity, one of the things we asked about was, what do you think, what is cybersecurity for? What would you have it for? Why do you want cybersecurity? Why do you talk about it? Why do you invest in it? And so this shows that a certain number, 46%, so almost half, think of it really as a way to protect or to shield from risk. But 25% are a little more forward thinking. And so they think about it as a basis, as a foundation, as something you build upon in order to create the digital transformation. If you think about it, that really makes a lot more sense. to be able to have that as the underpinning of everything you do. So many things now, like we talked about, when things are, they talk about those digital assistants in your home that may be recording you and things like that. When people are just buying things because they think they're cool, they might not have this foundation of digital transformation of security in mind. But if you have that, I think you'll be in a situation where you'll have the right way to build to have a secure organization. And then the 16% who say that they only think that cybersecurity strategy would be important because it's a requirement to meet compliance obligations. Obviously, they're probably not protecting their businesses the way that they should. So we asked them, are you in the process of digitally transforming? Are you trying to bring your business into an even more modern age? And interestingly, there's a number of them who have, well, first of all, the majority of businesses are, and you would think that that's the case. But then within that, there are a small percentage, 44%, who think that you should think about your cybersecurity before the project starts, before you go through the digital transformation. And there are others who the other 56%, they think it should be done at some point later, some of which think that it shouldn't be considered at all, and some of them think, well, maybe at the early stages. But really what we're seeing in terms of making sure that a company is secure is thinking about it before the project starts, building it as your foundation, having it be the underpinnings of everything you build on from there is the way to ensure that you have as strong a position as possible. So then the next question, which is really interesting and something that's coming up a lot these days, is artificial intelligence. So machines that think for you, machines that help you identify things. So we asked Frost & Sullivan to ask these people who were interviewed in the Philippines, what do you think about artificial intelligence? What are your thoughts in terms of whether it would be something that you could use for cybersecurity? So it's no surprise to know that the majority are thinking about it. The majority think it's something that will be relevant in the future. Some maybe not today. So half of the people aren't today, but some of them are thinking about in the next 12 months or so. But then there's about a third who are already exploring this. And so at least in POC, proof of concept, that they're looking at artificial intelligence. And it's interesting because it is something where if you can get something that's effective, that's secure, and that's able to work when you're not working, who can be addressing any threats that come through on holidays, which we see sometimes happening when other people wouldn't be there, it's definitely something that that's worth thinking about. So in terms of solutions, and we can talk some more during the Q&A if you have any, but artificial intelligence, I think, will be a wave of the future for us. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Angela.